Good afternoon, everyone. We'll just begin, if we could, by calling this meeting to order, the Ways and Means Committee. Today is June 23rd. I'm John Quincy, Chair of the committee, and we're joined by Council Members Johnson, Bender, Palomasano, and Yang. And we're a quorum of this committee, so we'll be able to begin our work. I expect Councilmember Glidden will be joining us soon. There are 27 items on our consent agenda this afternoon. They include the City Coordinator's offices bringing forward 2 items, including the approval and acceptance of 2 gifts and the authorization of staff to enter into a contract with Minneapolis Downtown Council for the purpose of the holiday event in 2014. I think we're going to be pulling that for a little bit of discussion and after this consent agenda is looked at. The Convention Center is requesting approval of 2 items this cycle. Those are for the authorization and appropriate staff to amend and restate the wireless networking services agreement at the Convention Center and the acceptance of the low bid with Shaw Lundquist Associates for the exterior door replacement. The Emergency Communications Department is recommending the extension and contract increase for workplace culture/change management services with Employee Strategies, Inc. Items numbered 6 and 7 are from our Finance and Property Services Department. Those 2 items are the authorization for outstanding receivable write-offs and the approval of a resolution waiving the City of Minneapolis allocation of qualified energy conservation bond and consenting to reallocation to the authority of the Metropolitan Airport Commission. The Department of Information Technology brings forward a request to execute a contract with Granicus, Inc. through June 20th of 2017 for the Legislative Information Management System. And the Executive Committee brings forward the tentative labor agreement with Minneapolis Foremen's Association for a 36-month contract period. Community Development Regulatory Services Committee referred 3 items to us today. The first is item number 10 for several actions related to the sale of city-owned lot asset at 3104 East 52nd Street. Item number 11 are a series of actions related to our rehab support, Green Homes North, and home ownership opportunity Minneapolis programs. And item number 12 is the authorization for staff to negotiate and enter into a contract with Mortensen Construction for construction manager at-risk services for the Target Center renovation project. The 3 items referred from Health and Environment and Community Engagement Committee are the Revenue Cycle Management Services for School-Based Clinics program with Bridge Healthcare Partners, and authorizing the execution of an agreement with the state of Minnesota to accept a 2-year grant of up to $128,662 for the Preconception Health in Minnesota program. Item number 15 was sent forward without recommendation, and I'm going to be pulling this item as well for discussion of an amendment for our consideration to the Minneapolis Tree Advisory Commission financial recommendations. The Public Safety, Civil Rights, and Emergency Management Committee referred items number 16, 17, 18, and 19 for our approval today. Those are for a contract with Downtown Improvement District to receive funds for increased summer enforcement, authorizing a contract amendment with Hennepin County Sheriff for jail fees, and item number 18 is authorizing contract agreements with Hennepin County 4th District Court for a 1-year period for MPD to provide drug court research and monitoring services between the police department and the drug court. Item number 19 is authorizing the contract with the Minneapolis School District for receiving $1,060,000 for school resource officers. The Transportation and Public Works Committee is referring 8 items to us today. Items 20 and 21 are for resurfacing projects. 23 is to authorize negotiation and execution of an agreement with Minnesota Sports Facilities Authority, allowing the city and the MSFA to cooperatively participate in the cost of public infrastructure improvements related to the multi-purpose stadium project. And number 24 is to the acceptance of a donation of the furnishing and installation of landscaping at PV Plaza, valued at approximately $30,000 from the Minneapolis Downtown Council. Next is to authorize negotiation and execution of an agreement with Hennepin County for $6,000 for the Natural Resource Incentives Critical Habitat Program for reimbursement for activities that reduce stormwater runoff to the storm sewer system leading to Lake Nokomis. We also have the acceptance of 3 low bids from Project Restorations, Inc., Safety Signs, LLC, and Furpel Construction USA, LLC for 3 great projects, and the acceptance of a single bid from Duke's Root Control for sewer line root control services. Final item from TPW is related to the Nicollet Mall redesign and reconstruction project. An extensive presentation was made at that committee last week, and with this important initiative for our city. The actions before this committee is to approve the proposed concept and cost estimate of $50 million for the program, or for the project, acceptance of the $21,500,000 grant from the state of Minnesota, and authorize the execution of grant agreements, increase the appropriation and revenue sources, as well as authorization to negotiate agreements with property owners and James Corner field operations as needed and outlined on the RCA, and approve a waiver of the city's RFP policy and procedures, and authorize the negotiation and execution of a contract for project management, authorize staff to initiate a process to select a construction manager for the project, and appoint the 10-member Nicollet Mall Implementation Committee. Are there any other items on the consent agenda, aside from item number 15 that I'm going to be pulling, and the item related to the Holidazzle event, or whatever we're going to be calling that we'd like to talk about? Okay, so, I'm sorry, Councilmember Yang, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. With regards to item number 27, I'm doing the math here, and there is a shortfall of about $3.5 million. Do we have a plan for that? What's the situation? And I apologize, I do serve on the Transportation and Public Works Committee, but I was not present to ask that question there, and so hopefully that's appropriate.
Sure. I'd be happy to answer that, but I bet Councilmember Glidden, would you be able to help direct that, as you're a member of that team and obviously familiar with the bonding?
Well, I was just going to say, Mr. Hecker is sort of motioning that he might be prepared with a response. We clearly don't have that right now in the budget, and so I think this is perhaps wrapped up a bit in the mayor's budget process, which is ongoing right now.
Fair thought.
And we
Thank
didn't
you.
discuss this aspect at TPW.
Okay. Mr. Hecker, could you care to comment on that from the mayor's office?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, the intent is to address that shortfall in the mayor's 2015 budget. I think Councilmember Glidden said it exactly right.
Does that help address your question? We recognize that there's a gap in that financing, and that'll be dealt with during the process, budget process for 2015.
That's correct.
Good. Okay. So let's go up to item number 15, related to the Minneapolis Tree Advisory Commission financial recommendations. I'd like to move to amend number 15 by reallocating $75,000 of the $393,140.34 proposed for the removal of tree coffins to the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board Fund for the purpose of grinding stumps as part of the ash tree replacement program. The amendment, I think, is at everybody's desks, and we've shared that with you. It's gone through the Tree Advisory Commission, and it seems to like a natural blend of capital resources that we could make that allocation. Are there any other questions or comments on that amendment? Let me, okay, Councilmember Glidden, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so I just had a question. It's more about the park board and just trying to understand how those resources will be utilized. The stump grinding is like one of these things. It's also a really frustrating and sensitive topic for neighbors often that have been waiting for stump removal for some time, and it's a challenging topic. So is the idea that these will be dollars will be allocated for stump removal that would happen citywide? That's my first question. And the second question, is there an idea of when these resources will be utilized? And I'm just a little bit unfamiliar with how the park board does this process. I think we would want to know that these are resources that frankly can be utilized, and that we're not sending them off into a place where they're not utilized for 3 to 4 years down the road. And again, this is a little bit of my just lack of knowledge with how the park board does this? Do they contract out for these services? Are these their own staff, and so the staff already have a full plate? I just am unclear.
Well, as I understand it, it's a great question, and I don't know if there's anybody from finance that might be able to help address that. Ms. Christensen looks like she's making a reluctant move to the microphone. I will say that this is, as I understand it, these were monies that were set aside in several years' capital budgets through the CLIC process, 150,000, 150,000, and 150,000. And there was a balance left over of more than 393,000 that was not used for capital. So we investigated, I understand, with the Park Board's assistance and with the Tree Advisory Commission's input on how to best use those for capital projects. And they came up with the removal of the tree coffin concept. And then, as I understand it, with conversations with Council or Park Board Chair, President Walensky and Superintendent Miller, they said, how can we use these funds to do some other projects that fulfill the requirement of being capital? And that's where the stump grinding came up as an alternative, and that's what they would be making the funds available for. But I don't know their process either. Perhaps Ms. Christensen can enlighten me, or maybe Mr. Garwood might be able to add some.
Chair Quincy, Councilmember Glidden, I'm not familiar with the exact conversations that may have been held with the folks in the Parks Department. However, because of the nature of the funding as net debt bond funded capital dollars, we actually have not borrowed the money that we would have been using to pay for this project at this point. So if they're unable to complete the work this year with their existing scope of work, it would be available for them next year. I don't know if that answers your question, but I don't know if they can use it if they are able to physically do the work this year, it's available. If they're unable to do so, the funding would be available next year as well.
And that would probably be a staff capacity question as much as it is a resource question of how much they can actually do, or whether they'd need to go out and contract for services.
Certainly, and that's within their purview and how they administer that program.
As I watched the presentation, I understood that there was a big lag in when the tree is cut down and when it's removed, so when we can actually use the replacement trees to rebuild or reforest the canopy. So if we're able to accelerate the grinding process, we can get those trees planted sooner, and I hope that's up to the Park Board and the Forestry Division. Mr. Garwood, do you have any other comments you'd like to share? Councilmember Glidden, does that help you?
Yeah, I think this is, my guess is as far as we can get here, just since we don't have the right person to answer those questions. And so I'm happy to forward my question to the Park Board just for clarification.
We can do that.
Thank you.
On the amendment to the item, is there any further comments, questions? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And opposed? That amendment is carried forward, so we'll go to, we'll include that as an amendment to the item on the consent agenda when we get to that portion of the agenda today. On the item, I forgot the number, but it's related to the Holodazzle event from the coordinator's office.
2.
No, item number 2, thank you. Is there anybody from the coordinator's office that would care to talk to this? Or should we just go right to Mr. Kramer, if you could join us with that? I know this is a question that Councilmember Johnson had sent around, and everybody's been offering some tidbits along the way. So I'm going to yield over to Councilmember Johnson, see if he could address this item with specific questions and see how we can move it forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I saw this item come through, and really my interest is understanding how this fits into our strategy around event funding in general. $400,000 is a good amount of money, and that might not be, it might be perfect for this. I want to understand how many other events we fund, what kind of levels of funding we have for those events, that sort of thing, because we do have a lot of events downtown. Aquatennial, great event.
Right.
A whole bunch that you've worked on. And do those receive funds from the city, direct funds like this? And what's kind of the vision here?
But before we begin, Mr. Kramer, I think this these are really questions that we really talk about. It's more of an enterprise. So I'm going to see if we can direct the question to Mr. Carpenter first and invite you up as appropriate for specific comments. So Mr. Carpenter, can you help us with this?
Mr. Chair, I will do my best.
Thank you.
This action arises narrowly from the next phase of holodazzle conversations. For years, the city has worked in partnership with the Downtown Council to provide funding that supported the holodazzle event. I believe it started in 1992. Recently, over the last few years, we've contributed approximately $300,000 or more to those activities. I don't know what the total budget for the holodazzle per se was, but it was multiples of that number, I'm sure. For a variety of reasons, in 2013, we sunset some of the existing arrangements that supported our holodazzle funding and did a one-time budget allocation out of the coordinator's office for approximately $300,000 to support the last iteration of holodazzle. Earlier this year, then, Mr. Kramer and the Downtown Council approached the city and the mayor's office and various council members with proposals about a next phase of downtown activation broadly and a winter event specifically. Through a series of conversations, it was decided that we would take this 1 year at a time, and for 2014, a proposal was put forward for the city to fund approximately, I think it's $395,000 in support of a revised winter activation, which Mr. Kramer can describe in more detail, deferring until the 2015 budget process any long-term commitments related to downtown activation through the Downtown Council. To answer the other part of your question, Councilmember Johnson, I don't know that we have a compilation of all the different events that the city directly contributes money to. By and large, I think our support is primarily through the ongoing staff that goes around road closures and public safety and things like that. And there are, I'm guessing, a limited number of events where the direct city dollars go into the event planning budget per se.
Does that address your questions, Councilmember Johnson, or do you have additional follow-up?
I think for the most part, that addresses those questions. I mean, knowing that we don't have really other events that we're directly funding like that. I'm sure there are some. Open streets, I think, is one where, no? Seeing a head shake, kind of, maybe? Support services for that, closing off the streets. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I guess, could you help me understand what would happen if it wasn't funded with the $400,000 from the city?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Councilmember Johnson, I can maybe elaborate a little bit on Mr. Carpenter's history. The funding relationship did start in 1992. It was actually at that point $1 million, and it was much broader than events. It was really in response to concerns about the future of downtown retail. So it funded the Do the Town parking validation program, if anybody remembers that, as well as some events. And then over the years, it kind of shrunk in terms of dollar amounts and really focused on, in recent years, the holodazzle program. So there has been this long history of a funding relationship between the city and the Downtown Council around the general proposition of maintaining a strong, vibrant downtown. And in recent years, it's taken the form of supporting the holodazzle parade. I think it's fair to say that without continuation of this level of support, or something close to this level of support, we simply will have to take a winter off. We simply won't be able to have a downtown holiday activity. We've already made the decision, and you all are aware of it, as is the general public, that the holodazzle parade per se will not continue. We felt and believe that others feel as well that having some kind of signature event, some kind of activity that brings literally tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people downtown during that holiday period, and here we're talking about the period from Thanksgiving through the Christmas holiday, is very important. And so we've considered that or recast that as what we're calling the Holidazzle District, a much broader area of downtown where a number of holiday-themed activities would occur. With this new activity, the winter market, which you see in other North American cities, especially in Europe, you see it as a kind of a new centerpiece for the holiday tradition in Minneapolis. I think without the support, we simply wouldn't be able to do that activity. So we'd be kind of taking a winter off and I guess try to reconnoiter and figure out what might be possible in the future. As I think I know I provided to you, Councilmember Johnson, and I could mention to the other members, the level of support we're asking here is certainly considerable, no question about that, but it is kind of by about a $3 to $1 amount matched by private investment or sponsorship or other dollars that would be coming into this set of holiday activities. And if you add in the other events in this calendar year that the Downtown Council is responsible for or working on, including Aquatennial, that match figure goes up to about 5 to 1. Aquatennial is purely privately funded. There aren't any city dollars in Aquatennial, just as one example. So.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Kramer. There are going to be other questions about this, I'm sure, but I'd like to just point out that Holidazzle, as its tradition has ended,
It has.
we really are at a point where you're evaluating from an economic development point of view and from sustaining the jobs and all the stuff that goes on in downtown, especially during the winter months, what's the best approach? And this is a new look, a new approach. Downtown Council owns this. This is your project, and we're just providing some sort of funding match or portion of it. I think a lot of it comes to the funding question of where is it best funded through. And I think the recommendation here is from the Convention Center Fund. Is that correct, Mr. Carpenter? The $300,000 is already in the budget in the coordinator's office. No, that's not correct. Help me.
Mr. Chair, the 2014 budget, because we contemplated when we developed the 2014 budget some form of next wave of holiday or other downtown event, downtown activation event, we put $300,000 in the Convention Center budget for 2014. That is in the existing Convention Center budget. Mm-hmm. The proposal here is to use that money already budgeted and then take the incremental $95,000 out of the coordinator's budget broadly, and not just the coordinator admin, where there are dollars available for these kinds of activities.
Councilmember Glidden.
Well, thank you. And Mr. Kramer, I don't know that you need to stand up. I think most of our questions are more, but I appreciate your being here, more for staff and in our team. I will say I wish there was more detail in this request for council action. It doesn't tell us much about what's the activity proposed, and we so that may be something. If someone could please send me a written update on what is being proposed. My sort of guess, or again, I've kind of heard the Vegas descriptions of this, and it actually does sound like a very fun event, but is that you're utilizing the convention center space? Am I wrong? I'm not sure I even understand where this is going to be. The convention center space? Plaza?
Portion of it.
No,
you're wrong.
All right, I'm wrong.
It's actually it's creating a big district, right?
Okay.
Chairman, I'd be happy to talk a little bit about the nature of the event, if that would be helpful, Councilman.
I think we probably can do that offline as we're looking for bigger questions about the scope of the district and what we hope to accomplish through it.
So why don't I just kind of get out my point, and then Mr. Kramer, if you would like to describe more, I think it's up to the chair what time he has in the committee. I will say, kind of going back, I understand there has been a long, and I would say maybe unique and unusual partnership around this issue, which really generated out of the competition that was created with suburban communities, really focused on the Mall of America, correct? And so that there was, at the time, and I would say still, is concern about how downtown retail maintains its attractiveness and competitiveness when there are other very large, international venues such as the Mall of America that probably, because they're all indoors, have some attractiveness that is just different than how you experience retail life in downtown Minneapolis. So, I mean, that's a really long-term, description of why I think also the dollars that went into this were much larger at another point in time. And I think a good question for us is today, from the city perspective, it's not about, is this an important partnership? I think it's an important partnership, or at least that's my perspective. But the question is, what is the event? What funds make sense to support this? Knowing that I do think it's actually a very important point for all of us up here. How do we fund or not fund other events? Because that's what is the question raised. I will just say from my perspective, I am not as challenged about thinking about the convention center funds supporting this. I think traditionally the convention center funds have supported activities if they can be connected to kind of that purpose of the convention center and again, building the economic benefit of that facility, and that has been used broadly. I know there's sort of a definition around how that has happened. What is more challenging to me is the use of the city coordinator funds, and this is where I just will say this is not Mr. Strobel has a long needed vacation that is happening this week, so I regret that I'm raising this when he is not here to speak on behalf of his office. But that is what is challenging to me, is the city coordinators, funding from the city coordinator's office being utilized to fill the gap. So again, it's not about the importance of the partnership, and frankly, at least from my perspective, again, it's not about the convention center funds, which have been used over a series of years in different increments, I think, to fund this project, and some others somewhat like it. It's the convention center funds sometimes have also been used for specialized security support, again, in that particular zone, other things that can relate to that. It's the use of the city coordinator funds from the city coordinator office and what precedent that might set. And part of this may be I don't have a great understanding. I did in a sort of an email that I sent get a response that there is some inclination to utilize the arts focus from the city coordinator's office to have a connection to this event. But again, I don't know enough about that and why that makes sense. My preference would be for this to be funded through city coordinator, through convention center dollars this year and into the future. And perhaps we need a better presentation again on what makes sense for this event, knowing that while there's unique history to this event, we also, I think, have a lot of great events that we touch in different ways in the city. It is unusual for us to have a direct appropriation to supporting those events, and that's why it becomes a little bit more difficult. Probably if there is not another solution, I would support this for this year, but I'd probably be asking some questions between now and the city council meeting about what could be other ways to look at the funding for this event.
Thank you for that. Councilmember Yang, please. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to reiterate what Vice President Glidden has said with regards to the direct appropriation in this matter. And, I think, when you think about this, you think about it within the context of, what about the other great events in the city, and what about them not receiving direct funding? And maybe, it's probably an enterprise question with regards to, if we're going to fund this event, we should have just a pool for other events just to draw into. And so, Steve, if I may ask you a question, my understanding is that the downtown council is putting in about $1.3 million into this project, and then the city would put in about $400,000. And from what you said a little bit earlier, if the city doesn't make this appropriation, this event won't happen, right? Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. And could I just ask, the $1.3 million, where is that coming from? And why would an event not happen with that kind of money already?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Councilmember Yang, let me be precise about my numbers here. What I've described for staff, and I'd be happy to send this to all the committee members, is a project budget for all activities in downtown Minneapolis that the downtown council has some connection with and responsibility for 2014 that totals. Now, I'm going to get to holiday, but this is sort of the big picture. This is the full picture that totals roughly $2.5 million. And of that, about $1.9 million is private dollars. So the balance would be this funding that we're talking about for the holiday period. That comes from a variety of sources. It comes from private sponsorships. It comes from some investment on behalf of the company that we would be working with to actually present the market. They'll put their own private capital into this. So all non-public sources, corporate sponsorships, private investment. The city funding would help us stand this market up as a new activity for this year in the context of this larger area that we're calling the Holidazzle District, at least as a working title, where there would be other holiday-themed activities. From our perspective, if we can incorporate the Convention Center Plaza as a part of the Holidazzle District, that would be tremendous, because we see the market existing at PV Plaza, just to answer one of Council Vice President Glidden's earlier questions. And without that level of funding, even though we have the other dollars committed to other activities over the course of this year, and some committed to supporting this market or supporting the Holidazzle District, the market itself simply couldn't move forward without this level of investment. The private dollars involved are not sufficient to allow us to move forward with this new activity this year. If this becomes a recurring activity, again, I think this is one of Council Member Johnson's earlier questions in an email, if this becomes a recurring activity, the level of investment that we have to make in the market itself actually goes down. But there is kind of a startup cost, a startup factor that we have to account for here in order to get rolling with this new kind of holiday activity in downtown Minneapolis. Is that responsive?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. If I may,
Sure.
a couple more questions. With regards to what you mentioned a little bit earlier, in 1992, the history. I mean,
Yes.
Vice President Glidden touched on some certain parts with regards to the competition piece, but one of the other pieces was you had mentioned that at that point we wanted to make downtown, or we wanted to build up downtown a bit with that sort of parade or the Holidazzle events, and 1992 and 2014, I mean, we're at different places now with downtown. Is that, a fair assessment?
Mr. Chairman, Councilmember Blunt, yes, I think we are. I think Council Vice President Glidden was right. That initiative, and I was a member of the City Council at that time, that initiative very much came from a sense that the Mall of America was a significant threat to the future vitality of downtown, and one of the challenges was the different experience in parking for downtown retail versus going to a retail mall, especially when the scale of the Mall of America, and then the sense that we needed to draw people in for vibrant activities. What isn't different now, 20 plus years later, is I think the importance of continuing to center downtown Minneapolis as sort of the core of the region's economy, and special events like this, especially at the holiday season, especially when there has been this tradition of literally hundreds of thousands of people coming downtown. I think to not have that in some new way would be a loss to downtown. There's no question in my mind that it would be. And it certainly would be an economic loss to many of the merchants downtown, and I think it would be a psychological loss to the role of downtown Minneapolis and kind of the life of the region. So that's why we've been pretty committed to trying to find a way to move forward with something new, even though it isn't going to be the Holidazzle Parade, which frankly after 22 years was a little bit tired. So we needed to find kind of the next iteration of what that holiday tradition in downtown Minneapolis would be.
Mr. Chair, if you will indulge me, just one last question. Mr. Kramer, what does the Downtown Council envision in terms of future funding and future asks of the City Council?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, Councilmember Yang, We made a more significant proposal earlier this year to the mayor's office and council leadership that, as Mr. Carpenter indicated, is being considered in the context of the budget proposal that will come forward for your review. That more significant request covered activation downtown all year long. You know, it's one of the goals of the 2025 plan is to create in downtown a consistently compelling experience all through the year. And so our proposal kind of touched on ways that we would do that quarter by quarter through the course of the year, and also focused on the fact that with the new Nicollet Mall, an important part of the success of that initiative will not only be an outstanding physical design, which I think we have, but also the ability to bring exciting activities to that new space, which will activate it year-round. So my understanding is that that's being considered, and whatever the mayor's office recommends will come to you for your review. But as Kevin indicated, for this year, the priority really is to try to launch this new holiday activity since we don't have anything else. And so that's why the proposal is focused on this one part of the year, whereas the larger proposal, which will be considered through the budget process, is year-round. I might say that, in my mind, that perhaps opens the door to this enterprise conversation that you all are beginning to have about, if only downtown, what about neighborhoods? And maybe there's an opportunity to have that conversation in the context of what we have proposed for downtown. But I am concerned that without some level of continuing this partnership, which has been around since 1992, we are going to have this big hole for this year. And I think that will be damaging for Minneapolis generally and for downtown for sure.
Right. Well, thank you, Mr. Kramer, for that, for your thoughts on that. I guess I would just like to add, I think this is an important initiative to keep going forward, and I think there's going to be a lot of metrics along the way that we'll be able to demonstrate the value that this investment is yielding back on this time. As everybody has mentioned, it's going to be part of the 2015 budget process, so we'll continue to use those evaluation opportunities. But I would like to continue. Oh, there's more additions. I'm sorry. Councilmember Bender. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just quickly, I would echo what a lot of my colleagues have said. And I think the question for me, I think moving a transition away from a parade to a market makes sense with the downtown residential population growing and something that can serve the new downtown community. And I think that makes sense. But these questions about how does this fit into our economic development strategy? How does this balance against all of the so many events that we have in the city? Northern Spark comes to mind as something that's downtown as well as within a lot of our neighborhoods. So just making sure that we have some kind of defensible criteria for what events we are publicly funding. I have a lot of the similar questions that my colleagues have raised.
Not questions for you, though, Mr. Kramer. Those are for other topics. On this item, I'm going to just move the full consent agenda as discussed for the 27 items, including the amended item number 15. All those in favor of the agenda for 27 items as presented, please say. I'm sorry, you have a question, Councilmember?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. Could we pull number 2 for a separate vote? Is that still part of moving forward this consent agenda?
Yes, it is.
Okay. If the chair would consider that, that would be great.
On item number 2, all those in favor of item number 2 as presented, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, please say nay. Nay. That item fails. All right. On the remaining items on the consent agenda, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed. Those items move forward. I guess we're going to turn now to the discussion topics that we had on the agenda. We have several. The discussion items today include the consideration of a systems administrator position in the clerk's office, the creation and implementation of investment policy, and the continuation of our department presentation on city finances, this one being a discussion of the capital budget process. So the first up is going to be Mr. Carl, if you can join us, and we go through the item number 28, the Systems Administrator position. Please begin.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. The City Clerk's Office is requesting authorization for a new full-time equivalent position to serve as a systems administrator within the Council and Clerk Department to manage a number of systems and applications that are either currently in flight or which are anticipated to be initiated in the next year or two. Some of those higher profile mission critical systems are listed in your briefing material. The requested FTE is tied in part to item number 8 on your agenda today. As you know, the Clerk's Office is eager to launch a legislative information management system called LIMS that will automate internal policy support services, including workflow and report production, and provide a permanent web portal to all of our legislative and policy information accessible 24/7, 365 to internal and external users from an internet connection anywhere in the world. With contract approval, we are targeting a concurrent operation of the existing systems and our new LIMS sometimes in October of this year. To meet that ambitious schedule, the office needs a dedicated resource with the requisite skills, education, and technical expertise to provide immediate project management, systems design and configuration, and ongoing maintenance and support. As Council is also aware, the Clerk's Office has been in the process of implementing and perfecting a constituent relationship management system to serve the constituent service needs of the Mayor and Council offices. We need support for that system that when it's fully implemented, we can continue to manage that function. If approved, this position would serve as the department's direct connection to the central IT department so that we could partner on our enterprise functionalities for those systems and applications that serve all departments while also having the in-house specific expertise we need to maintain these department-specific applications which are mission critical to the Clerk's Office. I should note that the Clerk's Office has submitted this request within its 2015 budget submission. Asking for an FTE outside of the budget process is unusual. However, because of the timing of these projects, which are already underway, we're requesting authorization to create the new position now ahead of the regular budget timeline. We believe we can cover the costs associated with the new position for the remainder of this year using existing vacancy savings. We also recognize the larger context of this request with respect to the systems that are outlined on your briefing material, which will be requested also in the 2015 and future budget years. I'm happy to stand for questions the committee may have.
Thank you. I think we've had an opportunity to brief council members on this topic and understanding the importance that it is to continue the implementation of the LIMS system in particular, which we just voted to approve that contract. Are there any questions for Mr. Carl or comments? Seeing none, Mr. Councilmember Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With regards to this authorization, my understanding is that it's pretty unique, and that's why we're making, or the city clerk's making this request, and that's why we're considering this. It's not something that we would do willy-nilly for any other situation, but the need was great, and we have some high bar for them to overcome for us to make this move. Is that correct?
That is my understanding and my appreciation for bringing this forward. I wanted to make sure everybody had an opportunity to understand this because it is very unique. We want to make sure that everybody knows that we're trying to follow a budget process, that we're being very diligent in following and doing a tremendous job. When something unusual comes up like this and the need is communicated and bought into, it is outside the usual process. So that's why we made this a discussion item and made sure that we had that full opportunity to ask those questions of Mr. Carl. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to thank the chair and Mr. Carl for coming around and having a very thorough briefing on this. And I think it's makes a lot of sense. And I think we're all going to be happy with the results and better city government for it. So thank you.
Good. All those in favor of this item, please say aye. Aye. And opposed? That item carries. Thank you very much, Mr. Carl. I think next up is the scintillating conversation with, it's Mr. Plant is going to be joining us. Talk about, also isn't it scintillating? Okay. This is the discussion of the investment policy. This is the first time we're bringing forward an investment policy for the city. And we're happy to introduce Bruce Plant, our city treasurer.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and council members. This is Gladys Miller. She was the city treasurer 50 years before I started here at the city. She is seen holding 2 bags of fake nickels collected from the first parking meters here at the city.
You sure they're fake?
Yes,
All right.
I have a bag. I guess people
Misappropriation 50 years ago?
was content with parking meters at that time. She probably didn't need an investment policy for those fake nickels. But she oversaw $3 million of city funds, and she did not have an investment policy either. And as we know, a lot has changed since then. This is the city window down on the 2nd floor at City Hall, which brought Ms. Miller to my attention. And I wanted to point out, due to the internet and our new virtual window being open not only on Saturdays, but also accepting payments 24/7, 365. So, all right, why do we need an investment policy? Well, first off, it's just good governance, and it helps us make the most of the city's money and maintain our credit rating. Over the last year, we've incorporated the government finance officer's template, used our consultants, as well as incurred many staff hours from dedicated staff members to get us to this point, including, and I want to mention Ray Warrenemi, our investment compliance administrator, who spent a significant amount of time helping to pull this together. I want to thank him as well as everyone else in helping us get to this point, the first city policy for investment. So one of the other key things is we outline our objectives in this, and our most important objective is safety. And when most people think of safety with fixed income investments, and that's the only thing we invest in here at the city, they think of default by the issuer. However, the biggest risk to safety, and that's the loss of original principal, is the change in market interest rates over time. The change in those interest rates is the most important driver for results in our investments. And one of the things we've built in to safeguard us against market changes is we put some safeguards in our policy to manage for that effect. Also, Treasury has some key RFPs coming up this year, and we wanted to take a holistic look at this function by incorporating an investment policy along with our responsible banking ordinance and other info into the RFP process. The key RFPs we have coming up right this year, later on this summer and early fall, will be with our investment managers and our banking services partner. Right now, the RFP for the 7 investment managers will be going out sometime in July. So what's covered under our investment policy? Well, in its broadest sense, it's everything, every dollar here at the city. But primarily it's focusing on this top section of the triangle, which is, as I like to look at it, kind of a breakdown, and each of these sections is to indicate the magnitude of dollars invested in each one of these areas. But primarily it's on this top part, the investment section. The city has $680 million of investments. I'll show you how those are broken out in a future slide. We have cash in bank deposits of $6 million, and then a small amount of cash on hand, as Council Member Quincy came up and audited earlier this year. So can attest to that. It helps me to think of this kind of like my personal finances. When you look at this, the top part is really for those longer term investments that the city might be making. The middle part is how you pay your day-to-day bills, and then the bottom hand would be the cash you need to pay day-to-day out-of-pocket expenses. We earn the most money, the more money we push up into their top section, because that's where we're getting the biggest reward for our money. And the city has done a pretty good job of this over the last several years by pushing more money into the investments and making that our biggest portion. We've accrued an additional $8 million in earnings over that time period. So it's been working very well from that standpoint. So let's look further what's into this top section. As I mentioned earlier, it's all fixed income investments. There's no equities involved. And as you can see, of those fixed income investments, they're all in government agencies, with the lion's share of that being with U.S. government agency and U.S. Treasury. So the federal government is our biggest issuer that we invest in. Through the first quarter of 2014, our portfolio has a weighted average maturity of 1.5 years. And that's one of the safeguards that we built into our policy, to make sure that we're not getting too far out on the yield curve, investing too long in our portfolio, and can't quickly adapt to interest rate changes. As we all know, interest rates are at a historical low, and our yield to date maturity so far has been less than 1% on our portfolio. The diversification of our investments and their results compare favorably with other cities, U.S. cities of our size throughout the country. And with some of our expertise being in the municipalities, that's helped us pull a little extra return on investment on those issuances as well. So that's pretty much what I had for you as far as what is involved in the investment policy, and be happy to entertain any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Plant. I just wanted to compliment you, of course. This is a tremendous body of work that it comes up, and it is the first time we've had an investment policy, and that's worth noting. It's also worth noting that it's in partnership with all the other things we're trying to do in the city as being responsible stewards of the city's finances, and it's an important step forward. And using the GFOA's investment policy as a starting point, I think you and Mr. Carpenter and the rest of the finance team have done an exemplary job of repurposing that, putting it to match our values and our processes, and establishing a very clean policy for us. In particular, I just wanted to highlight for members the priorities, the portfolio objectives and strategy. They're outlined under item number 4, and they begin with the safety, followed by liquidity, diversification, and following yield. So this is what we're about, just taking care of our money and making sure it works for us the best as possible. Mr. Carpenter, did you have any comments or anything you'd like to add before we adopted this fabulous body of work? If I could begin, Mr. Carpenter, Councilmember Johnson has jumped into queue. I'm going to go to Councilmember Johnson first, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a question because I don't know much about this, and so I'm just wondering, with the mortgage-backed piece, is there any way that we are able to, or is it already being tied to mortgages in Minneapolis? Is there any way to see that investment is benefiting our community as well?
Good question, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson. We invest in securities that are backed by the U.S. government, and one of the downsides of that is we get a pool of investments that we can choose from, and so within those buckets, I'm sure there are Minneapolis mortgages included in that. However, to specify, it's not marketed that way. They're marketed as big bucket of mortgage-backed securities through Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, Ginnie Mae type federal organizations. So the good news is we get the backing of the U.S. government. The bad news is we can't target to any specific neighborhood or city.
Great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I think Councilmember Johnson actually brings up a point that I failed to discuss a little bit further, is when we passed our responsible banking ordinance last year in October of 2013, we really were talking about how are banks responding to our local needs and how are we seeing that reinvestment. And that yielded a conversation about investment banking as part of our finances. How many investment managers do we have right now on I don't know, wouldn't even call it retainer, but how many do we engage with?
We have 7 investment managers today, and that brings up a good point about responsible banking. So even though we're not investing directly in those things, as we look to our investment managers and our banking services partners, we're looking for them to state to us how they're investing in our communities and factoring that into our decision process as well. So,
and not that it's directly tied to the investment policy, could you outline some of that information we're collecting to use in disclosure forms and how that's going to lead to development of RFPs and how investment managers are going to respond?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. We are asking for specifically mortgage information, how many foreclosures they have in our city, what kind of workout activity do they have for loans that aren't foreclosed on. We're looking at small business loan activity being done in the city, how many ATMs and what kind of access they have for banking services at the city, and numerous other things that I can't remember off the top of my head. But when we get to our banking services RFP, I'm going to be sure to highlight those as well. So
Quickly, what's the timetable for reviewing that?
we're looking at bringing that back here in July.
Okay.
To have you folks take a look at that.
Thank you. Any additional comments, questions from committee members? Mr. Carpenter?
Mr. Chair, no other comments other than I appreciate your comments about raising our standards on stewardship through this policy. It's a complicated matter, but it deserves a ton of attention through the stewardship lens about how we take care of roughly $700 million at the moment of city resources that have been entrusted to us by all those who come in contact with us. So thank you for your support on this.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. No further comments, questions? Member Glidden.
I just also wanted to join you, Councilmember Quincy, and thank you, Mr. Plant and his team for all the work that they did in reviewing this and tightening things up and continuing to make Minneapolis, I think, a place where we really have the gold standard of policies that guide our work. So thank you.
Very good. Thank you. I appreciate your comments.
All those in approval of the adoption of the investment policy as brought forward, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you, Mr. Plant. We've done it again. Ms. Christensen, I know you're excited. You're ready to go. Final discussion item for today's agenda is about capital budget overview.
Thank you, Chair Quincy, council members. I'm back again today with another educational presentation for you regarding various bits and pieces of the city's ongoing budgeting process. We've had a number of opportunities to talk about the various components, including the revenues and expenditures and property taxes. The operating budget was at our last session, and today I'm back before you to give you a brief overview of the city's capital budgeting process. So it's important to note before we get into looking at the city's capital budgeting process is to actually understand what is capital. In its very basic terms, capital assets are really, I like to just think of physical things that can that we can use in the course of our daily work. The residents drive on our streets. We have infrastructure. We have sewer lines. We've got the land that the city owns. We've got all of our buildings and everything that's attached to them is basically defined as capital. We also have things that are called intangible assets, such as some of our software systems. We have some major software systems that have been brought before this committee recently, including the land management system, the IOP, as well as the Enterprise Resource Planning, or the ERP program, which to date is looking at about a $14 million investment in the city's asset, and it isn't really a thing. It's more of a system that we're going to be using. So the definition of capital assets, it's really a broad category of items that we need to provide the services that the residents and the commercial community wants in our city. One thing it's important to note is we are kind of working on a long-term initiative to make sure that we're all speaking of topics in kind of the same language. So a lot of times you'll hear people talking about taking capital and investing it in the community or having capital programs. But from our standpoint, we get a little confused by that, because when I think of capital, I think of a thing. And quite often, capital as it's deployed in the community is more of a subsidy or development type of working capital resources that we put out in the field so that others can provide for building the city's assets. And at the bottom of this slide, I've listed out a few of the capital financing activities, which you had a presentation, your first presentation that you had regarding these topics was on the city's debt. That's a capital financing activity, so just a refresher on that. So what do we have for capital budgeting processes in the city of Minneapolis? There's various components. We have whether the Capital Improvement Plan, which is the CIP, the Capital Long Range Improvement Committee, which is CLIC, Capital Asset Request System, CARS. We have Facilities Maintenance Planning that we're beginning a process, and I don't have an acronym for it, so I had to come up with something, so that's TBD, as well as looking at enhancing some of our long-term planning for what I call event venues, capital planning, which pertains in large part to the convention center as well as Target Center. So what is the CIP? The CIP is a 5-year plan for infrastructure and other capital projects. The city's CIP is really provides much of the basis for the items that are brought forward through capital budget requests in the CLIC process. So it's more of a long-term planning tool. An overview of CLIC. The CLIC committee is comprised of 33 appointed members. Each of you has the opportunity in your ward to appoint 2 members. The mayor's office has the ability to appoint 7 members. And there is a chair and a vice chair of the overall 33-member committee. There are then 2 subcommittees in CLIC, one for transportation and one for human development, which basically covers everything that's not public works. Each of these subcommittees elects a chair and a vice chair. And when you take the chair and the vice chair from the overall committee and add the 2 from each of the subcommittees, we find that we have the executive committee, which is a 6-member committee. And what this group does is they review and rate all of the proposals that are presented by the departments in the capital budgeting process. And when they've gone through their process, usually many hours and days spent together looking at the various proposals, the departments provide presentations to the CLIC committee for them to ask questions and vet out the various projects. The CLIC committee then ranks the projects within the amount of funding that has been deemed available, and they recommend an overall program to the mayor and the council for further deliberation. And that, too, is a 5-year plan. Some highlights of the 2014 and 18 CLIC program. We're currently in the process of working on the 15 to 19, so we'll be back before you this fall to present the new proposals for CLIC, so we'll talk about what we're currently working on. The CLIC members reviewed and rated 99 requests, totaling about $611 million for the 5-year program. Following the proposals, the total adopted CLIC program was $593 million, just over 592. And of that program, there was $120 million that was adopted for 2014. Within the 5-year planning, the funding sources for the overall CLIC program include general obligation revenue bonds, which basically are bonds that are paid back through revenues obtained through our rates with the sewer, water, solid waste, et cetera. So there's about $111 million in the overall program for 5 years that's funded from revenues and enterprise funds. We also have approximately $154 million funded through general obligation property tax bonds. You'll generally hear them referred to as net debt bonds. They're funded through property taxes. The enterprise funds also will have cash on hand and the ability to bring in resources on an annual basis. We'll call that pay-as-you-go type of projects. We have $125 million built into the 5 years for those items. Municipal state aid, money from the state of Minnesota to assist in the maintenance and construction of streets within the city, $36 million. And then there are also a number of other projects, including those that are funded through special assessments, as well as other revenues in the tune of $166 million. And it's important to note, I mentioned earlier on a previous slide, that the CLIC members go through and prioritize their requests based upon the amount of available funding. It's a little bit different perspective than we see perhaps in the operating budget. Within the operating budget, we kind of go forward looking at what does the city want to accomplish within the year, and then look at the resources that are available and go back and fine-tune the request to meet the level of funding and what the tolerance is for any changes in taxes as well as revenue forecasts. In CLIC currently, what the city has done is kind of moved into a five-year planning horizon, whereby we look at the amount of debt that the city is capable of supporting within its tax policy, or the amount of taxes that it's willing to raise to pay for debt. So the amount of funding is determined ahead of time, and the projects are then limited according to the amount of funding. So sometimes what will happen is the realm of requests that are reviewed may be a little bit limited because of the amount of funding that's been deemed available. So we're working on a process with the mayor's office to provide for an opportunity for the departments to go beyond what has previously been deemed the available bucket, so that we can see the real universe of needs that are out there. For the 5-year allocation, as I
Sorry,
mentioned.
Ms. Christensen?
Yes.
I think Councilmember Palmisano has a quick question.
Sorry, if I could just interrupt you. So in your previous slide, the total adopted program of 593 million, is
Yes.
that what exists today? So we think that our 5-year plan is to have 593 million available to this set of projects that currently total 611?
It's for projects, there was a list of projects requested in the amount of 311 that were then put through a ranking process, prioritized, and some of those projects are not able to be funded.
Okay.
So in order to meet the requested needs, there would be a requirement for an additional, we got $18 million of funding over the 5-year period.
Okay. Yep,
Okay. Did that answer your question? Okay.
I think so.
Okay.
Thank
Come
you.
back if you have another.
Did you have one, Councilmember Clinton? Yes or no?
Well,
She is.
I mean, I just wanted to, and this may not be part of what Councilmember Palmisano was asking, but I just am unclear how familiar or not some of the newer council members are to just more the process pieces, which is that, CLIC, because they do have such a defined process, sometimes I think we think of them as having more authority than they do, really because they have a fantastic process and it's rarely gets different recommendations. But we will be able to see all of the proposals that CLIC makes and considers and evaluates. And they do go to the mayor's budget process first, and sometimes the mayor does make different recommendations than CLIC does. And then we would also have that opportunity as well as the final say on the budget.
Indeed, Chair Quincy, Councilmember Glidden, that's an excellent point, that the CLIC members do provide some assessment of, from a community standpoint, as to what projects they would like to see completed. But again, it's merely a recommendation to the mayor and then subsequently to the Ways and Means Committee and the full council. And there are every year there are some changes made to the list of recommendations that the CLIC committee brings forward. So it's not a done deal, so to speak, when they've completed their process of vetting out the projects.
Great, thank you.
On this slide, you'll see that there are a number of different areas within the city that the CLIC process encompasses. Over the 5 years, again, we've got $593 million. Some of the largest pieces of the overall CLIC budget include the street paving, which I think makes sense to most of us, storm sewers and the water system. Both of those are enterprise funds, so they would not be funded by property taxes. They would be funded through either money that flows through those funds on an annual basis as a pay-as-you-go, or through revenue-backed bonds that would be paid for by the users of the system. And you'll see there's a number of other public works subcomponents. We have sidewalks, bridges, traffic control and lighting. But then you'll note on the top of this slide as well that information technology, some of our larger systems for the overall city are included in there. Public facilities, MBC has a small portion, as well as the park board. And before I move on, is there any other questions I can answer?
I think we're good. Oh, I'm sorry. Councilmember Yang is in.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Christensen, hopefully this is a quick question. I mean, with regards to the CLIC process, public works, street paving, and sidewalks, the two amounts there, amounts to about 27%. I mean, is that essentially a subsidy that I guess like we as a city give to public works to take care of those projects so that residents have a smaller burden?
Councilmember Yang, on this slide is actually the expenditure side of the equation, so it does not reflect necessarily how the projects are funded. The street paving projects will generally be funded through a combination of city resources, special assessments. Occasionally we'll get federal funding for various projects, as well as the municipal state aid that I mentioned earlier. So you're only seeing the expense side here. It doesn't necessarily reflect how it's being paid for, which I can certainly provide that information. I don't have it available here.
Okay.
I think that's a fair question, obviously. What we want to do is to demonstrate the expenditure part. This is what we sell the bonds to cover, and then there are various revenue streams that go and pay back those bonds. That's the
Correct.
short answer to what you'll be
Correct,
providing.
correct. The sale of the bonds in order to finance the project is the ability to have the money now when we're paying the bills. The second capital budgeting process that I'd like to cover with you today is what we've called the CARS process. Still a work in progress. This is a new process that we entered into in 2013 for the 2014 budget. So we're still making some improvements, but overall it's been well received by the departments. What it is, a 5-year planning tool to handle planning for smaller operating capital such as vehicles, software, equipment, and each department has the opportunity to identify their capital needs over the 5-year period, to let us know in the finance department what they have available for existing funding, and then any ongoing operational cost. The net requests, after considering any money that they've accumulated in a fund balance or through an internal service fund, is then by nature a request for funding from the general fund balance. Anything else on that? Nope. So the total amount of requests for 2014 to 18 was $76 million, which I found a little ironic that the accumulation of small capital things turned out to be $76 million. But keep in mind that the CARS capital includes such things as fleet replacements, so you may be looking at a $1 million fire truck replacement, and some of the larger fleet items, including the replacement of police squad cars in any given year. So there's quite a few items of rolling stock that go through the city that are incorporated into this total. So the net new funding, or funding that had not already been identified, equated to $28 million. The total request for 2014 alone was a request for operating capital of $23 million. So you can see that we're really glad that we implemented this system, because apparently there's some pent-up demand for the purchases of these items. As $76 million divided by 5, we wouldn't be looking at $23 million in the first year. So the new funding requested for 2014 is $11 million. The total amount that was adopted was $21 million. And again, as I mentioned, the vehicles and the rolling stock tend to be a large component of the overall capital requests. So there's $10 million of that total, so about 50% is for vehicles. It was funded with a combination of $9 million of one-time general fund resources, as well as the accumulated resources in the enterprise funds and the internal service funds for the remaining $12 million. And you see that I have put a reference to what is Schedule 7 in your adopted budget book, and for the council members, I've included the Schedule 7 on the back of your packet, so you can see some examples of the items that we've brought through in the CARS process.
I think the CARS process has been really a tremendous budgeting tool, that it provides department heads to look out into the future instead of responding to the year swings, and suddenly they need something, then they had a bunch of money left over and they had to buy something that wasn't needed. Those are the things that really smooth out the expenditure curve, and as we're able to predict into the future what's needed, and we're able to set aside those resources to pay for those. Vice President Glidden, you had a thought.
Thank you. Actually, just a couple of questions, in part because the CARS process, and I'm still it's a very new process. I think it was just adopted last year for the first time. As I remember, there were a couple things that the committee was asking for as we were in the process, and so I'm a little bit just curious to know, are you still developing how that will be presented within the budget committee process? The other thing that I think was a little bit maybe odd for the first year, beneficial to it just working smoothly in the first year, but we had not yet been confronted with more of the situation of requests that exceeded amounts available, and then what would be a process for making decisions of what goes to the top of the priority list. The other thing, so just kind of that's more a process question of how that might be evaluated prior to when our committee or the council as the budget committee sees those requests. The other thing is that I remember we did not have much in the form of definition, that was perhaps still being worked out, other than kind of the very broad descriptions similar to what appears in the PowerPoint you have here. So I was curious if you were reviewing, should there be a more finer tuned definition of what might fall within that CARS process that also might help us with prioritizing requests when we get into that more difficult decision making situation of making choices.
Indeed, Chair Quincy, Councilmember Glidden, we're pleased to report that we have improved our process. We started the CARS process several months earlier this year, which allowed us to aggregate the data and allow the various departments to come forward with internal prioritizations, which will allow you, when it's brought forward, to see what they feel is some of the more important activities within their individual departments. We've prepared an overall packet that's being utilized in the departmental meetings with the mayor, so the mayor will be able to incorporate a recommendation within her budget recommendation. And we've also compiled a booklet, although it's probably more of a book, of about 180 pages of requests that will include the justification and the explanation as to why a department is either seeking or needs a particular item, including the ongoing operational costs, because we feel that's very important to identify. It's not just the one-time dollars going out the door for a new piece of software if all of a sudden we're having to come up with several $100,000 for annual maintenance. We don't really want to be surprised by that. So we thought it would be very important to incorporate that into the budget process earlier than we did last year. So yes, that will be available.
Good. Thank you.
Any other questions on CARS?
I think we're okay. If you could continue.
Okay. So again, there's a couple of other processes that we're working on to bring forward to you in the future. Some are coming along a little bit more quickly than others. Right now, we're working with the Property Services area of the Finance and Property Services Department to identify a longer-term overall facilities maintenance plan, which would be very similar to what we've been doing with CARS, but will be location-related and will allow us to start planning ahead for various system replacements, including ongoing roof replacement programs, boiler replacements, any HVAC items that we have coming down the road. It'll be particularly useful to have that information available when we start looking at any changes we make in staffing locations in the downtown area. We can do some comparisons with ongoing maintenance costs that we have with existing facilities. So we're really excited to get that put together so we can have some better decision making as it pertains to facilities. And finally, we've been working to identify more proactively some of the items that we see coming down the pipeline. Again, with the new project that we have going on at Target Center, we want to be proactive in identifying anything that may need additional work as it relates to that project, as well as with the Convention Center to ensure that because of some of the nature of some of the revenues within the city, we want to make sure that we're really proactive in identifying where we need to have the money at the right time. So that's a work in process. And that's about all I have on capital processes in the city.
Good. Thank you very much. Are there any final questions, thoughts for Ms. Christensen? Seeing none?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for the continuing series of education presentations that you're providing. Are there any coming up in the future that we should put a little pin in?
Chair Quincy, we are tentatively scheduled to come back with the fees, the ever popular fees project in July, and then TIF as part of the annual TIF reporting in August. We are required to file a report with the state auditor as well as a disclosure in the paper. So at the time that we bring that forward for your receive and file, I've also asked staff to prepare a presentation on TIF financing.
Good. So everybody can adjust their summer plans because they won't want to miss those. Okay. On this item, then, I'm just going to move to receive and file this report. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And thank you very much. With no further business, we are adjourned.